Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Spiritual Transformer. My name is Randy Koo, and I'll be your host for today. So, today I want to talk about everybody's favorites and the most controversial subject on earth. It's taxes. So, first, a little bit of a disclosure. This video isn't very spiritual. I mean, I'm talking about taxes after all, right? But it's what got inspired in my head this week, so I'm feel like I'm kind of obligated to talk about it because in this channel it's all about inspiration, and that includes myself. So taxes. Well, what can we possibly talk about taxes? Well, today I want to float an idea, a policy that I hope would make taxes fun, if you can believe it. So, what do I mean by that? Well, in my country, we uh, we have to file our own taxes. So what that means is that we have to take our income and then take any other income and more income and expenses maybe, and then deduct it all, and tax shelters and things like that, add it all up and do some math, and then bam, you have to figure out the amount of taxes that you got to pay. Okay, so that was a bit a roundabout explanation. It's Yeah, I use a tax software, which is kind of why I really don't have that much of a clue of all the exact math that goes in. I just plug in the numbers and the software calculates. But my point is, in my country, and I guess it could be in yours too, doing taxes, paying taxes is not fun. In fact, I would go so far as to say it's a pain in the ass. And a lot of people try to avoid it. And I can't really blame them because it's no fun. But what if there's a way to, I guess, take the edge off paying taxes or even doing taxes? What if there is a way to make it more fun? And that's what I want to talk about here today. So my idea of making taxes more fun isn't to stop doing taxes or make taxes simpler, or I guess that could work too, but or even like, yeah, you still have to calculate and do and filing your own taxes, but my idea is, at the end of all that pain and suffering, at the end of all those calculations and math and plugging in numbers and such, what if you get to allocate your tax dollars? I mean, isn't that amazing? So just throwing a round number here. I'm not saying this is how much I pay in taxes, but let's just say I pay like $10,000 in taxes, right? After all the math is in and after I file everything, I owe the government 10 grand. What if at the end of that, doing the taxes, comes the fun part? What if at the end I get to say where this $10,000 goes? Maybe it could go to healthcare, public transit, infrastructure, education. That's a big one, right? Maybe public safety, right? Imagine that. If I ever get elected to be head of state, I would literally make that my very first policy change. Just make it so that at the end of every year, when you file your taxes, the taxpayer gets to decide where their money goes in certain categories, of course. Can't be too specific. And that's it. Doesn't that sound fun? Well, okay, maybe it doesn't sound fun because I guess this is where it gets serious. I've had this idea for a very long time in my head, and I've just never really spoke about it. But the more I let it percolate in my mind, the more I realize that it's a great idea, because because you know how every year when the government makes the budget, some items always seems to be getting a spending boost, while other items always seems to be getting cut. And when you ask the government, "Hey, can we have more money in this category?" They always say, "Oh no, we got no more money." It's crazy and it happens all the time. But what if we as taxpayers get to allocate where our money goes, and everybody who pays taxes allocate where the money goes? Then the government can't really say, "Oh, there's not enough money in the things that we care about." You know what I mean? like education. If we care about education, and the government's always like, oh, we have no more money to like pay teachers or upgrade the schools. Well, if we get to allocate our tax dollars and we get to say, how much money we think that education is important and we allocate there, then the government can't say, well, there's no money because we get to allocate it. So that's my basic idea. Now, here I want to bring up a few rules, I guess, to make the idea work even better. First of all, I think maybe allocating the entire tax amount, like for instance, in my example, maybe allocating all $10,000 of my taxes that I paid might not be a good idea, right? Because the government needs some leeway. I mean, the government's big, they need money to run whatever it is they need to run that might not fit into certain categories like education or healthcare. So we need to give government some kind of discretionary spending, I guess. So I would say maybe the taxpayer can allocate, say, 50%, right? So in my example, I would allocate 50% of the $10,000, so that's $5,000, to whatever category I want. And then the other five can just go straight to the government for them to spend whatever. Now, some of you might be going, well, that's a little too much. And I might actually agree, depending on if this idea ever gets implemented, depending on how much money people actually do allocate and where, 50% going to the government to do whatever they want might be a little too high, I gotta admit. But if we don't test it, we don't know if it's too high or too low. I'm only using 50% because, well, it's a 50-50 chance that I'm right or wrong, you know what I mean? So, yeah. So half of it, I think, should go to the government to do whatever, right? And the other half we should allocate. And another rule that I have is that only individuals get to allocate their money. So no businesses, no corporations, just flesh and blood human beings. I think that's fair. Yes, corporation pays taxes, but I'm not really happy about giving corporations or big businesses any more power than they already have. So my rule, if I was one implementing this, would be only humans get to allocate their money, right? And as for the actual categories themselves, it could be anything from healthcare, education, public safety, public transit, public infrastructure, I don't know, libraries, national defense, maybe even paying off the national debt could be a category, right? Figure out good 10, 20 categories and just let people choose. Oh, I want 50% of my taxes to go into education. The other 25% can go to, I don't know, paying down the country's debt, and the rest of the 25% can go towards infrastructure. Anything you want. And I think that this idea is beautiful because it lets taxpayers have some fun while they do something not fun. They get to salvage something out of it. Maybe take the sting out of paying taxes. And it's also kind of like an indirect vote, right? Every year it gives citizens of a particular country literally their say of what is or what isn't important to them. And this is when I get to the last rule. I think the rule is that however much the people allocate, the government can't take away from. So let's just say, at the end of the year, after everybody's filed their taxes and everybody's chosen how much money to allocate to certain categories, let's just say healthcare gets, I don't know, how many billions do you need to take care of the healthcare industry? I'm not really sure, but let's just say like 10 billion. People allocated 10 billion to the healthcare. The government has to give 10 billion and allocate that to healthcare on their budget, right? That's gotta be a rule. And if, let's just say people only allocated 10 billion to healthcare, but in previous years it's found that it's effective that you need at least 12 billion. Then the government can take, the discretionary spending portion and just top it up if they want. But my point is, whatever the people choose cannot be reneged upon. That should be the rule. If people file their taxes and they allocate 10 billion to a specific specific category like education, healthcare, whatever, then that's how much they're gonna get on the budget, like no less than that, right? Like I've never done the math. This is just an idea, but I'm so curious as to what people will put their money into, and I'm so curious as to see whether or not the amount of money people allocate by their own free will be greater and less than what the government is currently budgeting. That's really going to be quite quite curious and interesting for me to see. So that's my idea. And you know the beauty of it is, well, we've all heard, right? There are just some people out there who just don't pay a lot of taxes despite being very well and capable of paying, right? You know, the folks who use numbered accounts, offshore accounts, shell companies to avoid paying taxes, right? Basically, I love this idea because it gives a say to the people who pay. To the people who don't pay, they don't really get a say. And what can I say? I know for a long while now the tax base is mostly in the middle income, right? And hey, with my idea at least, that means the middle income earners have a say, have a very big say as to what is important to them. Literally putting money where their mouth is. So yeah, I think it would be a lot of fun just to see what people would pick, just to see which category would come out ahead, just to see how it all rolls. And personally, I think it would be fun to be able to have a say as to where my tax money goes. And yeah, you can kind of tell I'm pretty excited about this. And like I said, if I ever get elected head of state, this will be my number one policy, just to make taxes fun again. And you know, if I gotta be honest, it's not a perfect idea, right? I mean, these days, there's so many ways to influence people, right? So maybe, if the healthcare industry wants more of our tax dollars, they could start running ads to promote healthcare and say, hey, contribute, your taxes to healthcare, we'll make healthcare better, or education, or roads and public infrastructure, whatever. I can see there could be some room for abuse here, but I actually think that might be part of the fun. I mean, imagine all these commercials of from all these different sectors trying to get you to like, hey, allocate your tax dollars to us, I think it'll be fun to see who shows up at these parties, like who would actually be willing to pay to advertise to get our attention. I think it'll be fun to suss out who really wants our money, right? And I'm having a lot of fun just talking about this idea because I honestly think it is a fun idea. So yeah, spiritual transformer, spiritual channel talking about taxes. Well, there you go. But that's all I got for today. So if you like the content, please drop a like, subscribe, comment. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Randy Koo. You've been watching The Spiritual Transformer, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.